Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins. I'm joined as always by Brandon Scott. You know him as B. Scott. Well, it's May in Indianapolis, and it's time to discuss the biggest storylines of IndyCar. We're going to talk Penske. Will Penske's success equal a tainted month? We're going to talk Andretti. Is Colton Herta a legit title contender? We're going to talk Arrow McLaren. Is Kyle Larson literally the team's best chance to win the Indy 500? We're going to dive into all of that and more, as well as discuss what liveries we would want to see in a throwback race, as well as predict who will win this weekend Sonsio Grand Prix on the IMS Road Course. It's a great time. Justin Timberlake has welcomed us into May, and now it's time finally to turn our eyes to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and get the month going. And I'm really excited to get back to talking IndyCar because we talked about it. We did our tier list at the beginning of the year, and we've had some interesting storylines, to say the least, that we'll dive into during the course of the podcast today. But it's always fun to finally get to the month of May.
Yeah, I mean, okay, before we get into IndyCar, I gotta hit on the Justin Timberlake thing. There's a video out there on TikTok of somebody saying, what is a word that you have mispronounced that you will never live down? And it stitches over to Justin Timberlake. He's just kind of like, and he just goes, me.
Yeah. No, you said
the video.
You said that one to me. I was like, I do appreciate that. Because, and there's another one that I saw, and I don't know if you sent that one to me too, but it's where it's just a guy who's playing three parts in the skit, and one is the millennial, and one is like the Gen Z, and one is like the boomer, and they're all like arguing about like stuff, but because it's centered around being the month of May, and the millennial the whole time is just saying, it's gonna be May. He's just saying that the whole time.
That wasn't me. I didn't send you that one. Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, it's time to welcome spring when Justin Timberlake. That should be the new thing. We don't need Groundhog Day anymore. Just as soon as Justin Timberlake says it's gonna be May, that's when it's time to finally buckle up. Springtime's here. It's time to dive into IndyCar to Indianapolis.
Yeah, it is. It's the month of May. Got the house decorated and ready to go.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. And we've got some interesting topics to talk about tonight. So why don't we go ahead and just dive right in. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of welcome in NASCAR to the focus a little bit to start off. Kind of a palate cleanser before we get going with the IndyCar and the May talk. This weekend is NASCAR Throwback weekend at Darlington. And some of the notable schemes for NASCAR's Throwback weekend, you've got Austin Dillon throwing it back to Dale Earnhardt's 1998 Gold and Black scheme. My favorite, hands down, is Kyle Larson's throwback to Terry Labonte's 1996 championship season. If you remember the old Kellogg's car, the orange and blue one was fine, but the old yellow and red and white one
with the cornflakes rooster on it.
Right. That one is legendary, and that's the scheme that the Kyle Larson's that's the livery that Kyle Larson is going with this weekend. Chase Elliott's throwback to Dale Jr.'s 2014 Daytona 500 win. That one kind of misses the mark for me. Alex Bowman's throwback to the old Jimmy Johnson scheme, a la mid 2000s, like the lows. That one's really good too. You might have caught on to the fact that I'm for the moment only naming Hendrick ones, but that's because I think they do the best job with it. You've got William Byron's Firestorm scheme, throwing it back to Jeff Gordon. Now, granted, Hendrick also has a lot of legendary paint schemes because of how good their drivers have been. But you also have you also have Daniel Suarez throwing it back to Adrian Fernandez's 2004 IndyCar scheme. Brennan Poole takes the cake in Xfinity. He's going to pilot a throwback to Kyle Petty's Hot Wheels scheme in the Xfinity race. That one's going to be a lot of fun. And that's a situation that kind of gets into what we're going to talk about here, because I would 100%, I don't know that I will watch the Xfinity race, but I definitely am considering it now that I know I'm going to see like the Hot Wheels car driving around and taking me back to young Craig watching NASCAR back in the day, or even young Craig playing NASCAR 99. I used to love to drive the Hot Wheels car in that game. But it kind of begs the question, what would it look like if IndyCar had something like that? Tony Donahue, one of our friends from 1070 The Fan, used to be at 1070 The Fan, and Burnout Sports. He posed the question on X: if IndyCar had a throwback weekend, what liveries would you want to see? And I think that would be personally would be a good idea for the IMS Road Course, because the IMS Road Course, it has its fun moments, but it can, like last year, Alex Palou just kind of ran away with it. Just like any, street car, any race where somebody just runs away with it. It got a little boring at times, but what would be fun is if they did a throwback. I think that during the month of May would be a perfect time to do that for IndyCar, is have a throwback weekend race. And so I'm going to go through some schemes. I went a little bit overboard with it. I tried to get some for every single team, so I'm probably going to miss some obvious ones, but this is just where my head was at. So for Team Penske, starting off with Will Power, if he did the 2018 Indy 500 winning silver paint job, that would be really cool. Obviously, the Yellow Submarine is always an option when you have Penske out there. Scott McLaughlin could throw it back to 2002. Elio Castroneves, his Indy 500 winning scheme, the light red and white that Team Penske used to rock back in the early, in the early 2000s into right.
I mean, even before that, early 90s.
Yeah,
we're talking. I got it pulled up here. Let's see. 1989 was the first time I'm seeing that paint scheme, and that was with Emerson Fittipaldi.
Right. And so, because when I started this, I was like, well, I was trying to think of like number specific things. But then once I got into like Rahal Letterman, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm throwing that out. I just want to see cool schemes that you could do based on the driver, or the team. Rahal Letterman, I loved Graham Rahal's Steak and Shake car. That's probably the best car that I've seen him have, in IndyCar. If the Marlboro-esque Team Penske livery is taken, any throwback to Granddad Emerson Fittipaldi would be sick for Pietro Fittipaldi. That's seven. If you want to look at a cool paint scheme, 7-Eleven, the baby blue scheme that Emerson Fittipaldi rocked at the Michigan race that he won in 1985, was a pretty cool one. Meyer Shank, they don't have a ton of cool liveries, but they could rock it back to Elio's 2021 500 winning livery. He could literally drive it. If he wanted to, he could just drive that livery, which is funny because it's like this is during the month of May. Elio's only running the 500. Later on we could talk about Takuma Sato could run either an F1 livery that he rode during the U.S. Grand Prix when it was in Indy, or he could do an Indy 500 winning paint scheme as well for him. And that could actually entice some of these like legends who are kind of still on the fringe of IndyCar still, that just maybe run the 500. That could entice them to run both races. I know that they're usually just one-offs, and that would be a little bit, that would be extra money for them to do, but that would still be, kind of a thing that could potentially get some of those guys back. Hunkos Hollinger, Grosjean throwing it back to the Haas F1 livery that he was driving when he had the infamous Fireball crash. That would be pretty cool to see him rocking similar colors to that. Ed Carpenter, Ed could throw it back to the Fuzzy's vodka colors back in the early 2010s. Dale Coyne, an homage to Justin Wilson would be cool. The Z-Line livery he used to have. Then looking at like Chip Ganassi, you've got Juan Pablo's Montoya's 2000 Indy 500 winning livery. The only problem is that they were Target, Chip Ganassi, for the longest time, and were only sponsored by Target. That there's not a lot of different liveries for them. They ran a blue one. I can't remember what the primary sponsor was for that. But it was like one of their secondary sponsors.
The blue one.
Was that?
Wasn't that NCT Data?
But no, it was before that. It was
Carvana.
Right, but I'm thinking of like I'm thinking of like early like 2008 Scott Dixon, like Dan Weldon, Dario Franchitti. They used to race a blue livery, and I think Cottonelle's the only thing that's coming to my mind, but I know it was like one of their secondary sponsors would be like their sponsor for like one or two races, and it would be like blue. And that's what I'm trying to remember what it is. But regardless, like I said though, it's funny that they've been Target for so long. There's only recently has it been like DHL, PNC Bank. So like there's American Legion. Juan Pablo's HP F1 livery could be cool too. There's a lot of F1 things, especially on the road course, that you could throw it back to as well. I'd love to see a car, have a Ferrari livery or a Ferrari-esque livery, throwing it back to Michael Schumacher. Now, and going off of that, real quick before I go to Arrow McLaren, because they are the biggest potential F1 livery people. Marcus Armstrong drives the 11. He could rock a Tony Kanaan 711 throwback. That's personally one of my favorite liveries of all time, so I would love to see that. Arrow McLaren, another team that really hasn't had a bunch of different liveries, but well, they did
one. There is one from McLaren.
Okay, so let me see if
1976, Johnny Rutherford.
Okay. Well, I was gonna say, I didn't have that one. That one's not my book. I had James Hinchcliffe. Could do a throwback to him. Lots of potential F1 crossovers here. You could do like something similar to the West, black and silver, a la like Kimi Räikkönen. You could have like the silver and orange Vodafone colors, a la Lewis Hamilton's U.S. Grand Prix at Indy winning livery. There's a lot of things you could do with that. Alexander Rossi could throw it back to his 100th Indy 500 winning Napa colors. So that would be pretty cool. Moving on to Andretti for me, you would have, Colton Herta could rock the shell throwback to his daddy's. That's kind of what his current livery is based off of. He also drives number 26, so a Dan Weldon, Jim Beam throwback would be cool. Marco Andretti's New York Stock Exchange throwback would be awesome. So would Dario Franchitti's Canadian Club orange and black livery. That could go back to the number 27 and Kyle Kirkwood. Michael Andretti's Kmart livery is another good one. And then AJ Foyt, anything AJ Foyt related would be cool. And if not that, maybe Kenny Brack's Power Team white, yellow, and red scheme he ran when he won the 1999 Indy 500. So, you kind of think like, oh, what are the different ones you could have? And I think, any one of those schemes would be cool to watch that first weekend back at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of looked at this as a different view, but like with McLaren, it was an all orange car. It was very similar to what Fernando Alonso ran when his first year, the only Indy 500 he ran, but where it was all orange with like blue accent and trim. But for me, I just kind of looked at like some iconic ones overall that I would like to see. I don't really necessarily care who runs them, but like for instance, 1982, this one kind of a combo. This leads into NASCAR a little bit, but 1982 winning car with Gordon Johncock, the red and light blue with white trim STP car. That's just an iconic from across both NASCAR and IndyCar. If you're looking at Rahal, I would go with Bobby's 1986 winning Budweiser car. It was just all red and it just said Bud in random places. That was really nice. But yeah, with Penske, if you go with the white and red scheme, whether it was the old Marlboro schemes, those were just amazing. Those were the best. The other ones I looked at, yes, definitely Juan Pablo Montoya's Target scheme with the lightning bolts on the side. Definitely that one. And then the last two that really stood out to me. One, I'll leave this other one for last, but my next one is definitely the 2019 Simon Pagenaud Menards car. That bright yellow, I don't know, that's just so cool, and it was very different. I really like that one, but the one that I think it would be awesome to see somebody run is the 2011 Dan Weldon number 98 William Rost car. The orange, the white, the black. That was one of the, in my mind, opinion, that was like one of the best liveries. It was just a cool looking car overall. So I would definitely say that one I would love to see again.
Yeah, and you know, going back to Menards real quick. I mean, there's a lot of good Menards. Like if you want to go to like Tony Stewart, Greg Ray. There's a lot of good ones. Scott Brayton. There's a lot of good liveries with that. I know we're missing the one
Tony
that
Stewart.
Tony Donahue literally put this one up when he posed the question on X, and I was surprised that you didn't say it, and I didn't want to say it because I wanted to save it just in case we didn't mention it in like the regular rundown. But like the Ari Lyondike Domino's livery, that's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah.
And that's the great thing is because it's the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And because it's the start of the month of May, you've got so many different things you could go with, so many homages you could do, not just to because I mean we see Brad Keselowski, his Castrol livery is going to be going to like sport like supercars. I think like that's a throwback to a supercar, if I'm remembering it correctly. A lot of the drivers are doing throwbacks to their like what their liveries looked like during like when they were first coming up through the different series and that kind of thing. So you have a lot of options to maybe throw it to some F1 liveries. Maybe Penske and Ganassi are both in. Well, I don't. Is Ganassi's not still in NASCAR? Are they? They're not in NASCAR anymore. But you could do now that Arrow McLaren has their kind of like toe in there. You could have like Pato O'Ward could literally drive a Kyle Larson themed car, like a throwback to his paint scheme when he won, in 2001 the championship that year. Which I mean is the same one he still has, but
what I really like is Kyle Larson's paint scheme this year for the Indy 500 with Arrow McLaren is it pays a little bit of homage back to the original McLaren look with the orange and the blues. And it also incorporates the hendrickcars.com to it as well. But it's probably the closest one we have that pays tribute back to those some of the original schemes.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, because of their anniversary, McLaren did do that last year with all three liveries for Rossi, Felix Rosenquist, and Pato O'Ward. They were all like some sort of throwback to McLaren's history. So like teams are already doing stuff like that, and that would definitely get more eyeballs on the sport. And then you like I said, with being an IMS, you've got so many things, not just maybe team specific, but guys could just run different schemes, like you said, Menards and all that kind of stuff. They could just run certain schemes, and it would, I think, go off without a hitch.
And it wouldn't even have to necessarily have that same sponsor, obviously,
right.
but
just
the paint scheme.
Right. Well, because I mean that's what you see with like Kyle Larson, like for instance the Lowe's one for Alex Bowman, like it still says Ally. It's just in that Lowe's scheme, so like you can play with it a little bit. Like if Dixon did like a throwback to Juan Pablo Montoya, he could still have it'll still say PNC Bank. It'll just kind of look like the old Target Chip Ganassi cars, which would be really cool.
Yeah.
So just a fun exercise I thought would be fun to do as we enter the month of May. And like I said, I can't, this is one of those things, I think I said it before we started recording, or maybe I said it already, where I'm like, it's one of those things that like, I don't know that it'll ever happen, but now that like the thought has been planted in my brain, that's all I'm going to think about until it eventually happens, because it would be so cool to see those cars running around there in different throwback old school liveries. But so thank you, Tony D, for the idea. Make sure you go I think if I'm getting it right, this is off the top of my head, Tony D Indy on X, if you want to go follow him. He's got a podcast as well, so we're going to give him a little bit of a shout out. But let's go ahead and get into our month of May preview. Since we last talked IndyCar, a lot has happened. We had the Firestone Grand Prix of St. Pete. Joseph Newgarden started on the pole, led 92 of 100 laps to win the race. Pato O'Ward and Will Power round out the podium. Then we moved on to the Thermal Challenge. And that was IndyCar's attempt at an all-star race. Heat 1 had a majority of the action because that is when Roman Grosjean and Rinus VeeKay are caught up in an accident in the opening corner. Felix Rosenqvist started on the pole. He leads all 8 laps of the race, and he gets the win. Scott McLaughlin and Joseph Newgarden made up the rest of the podium. In Heat 2, Alex Palou starts on the pole, leads all 10 laps, and collects the victory. Marcus Armstrong and Graham Rahal finished second and third. And then the main event race, you're thinking, okay, we had Felix Rosenqvist dominating, Alex Palou dominating. This is going to set up for a really fun main event. Alex Palou starts on the pole, leads all 20 laps, and wins. He takes home the $1 million challenge. Then we were on to the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach. Felix Rosenqvist is the pole sitter. Will Power takes the lead from him on lap 2. There were 8 lead changes among 6 drivers. Scott Dixon led the most laps with 42. Joseph Newgarden led 15 laps. Scott Dixon on fuel strategy takes the lead at lap 62 and brings home the win. Colton Herta and Alex Palou join him on the podium. And then the most recent race was the Children's of Alabama Indy Grand Prix. Prior to the race at Alabama, IndyCar announced that they were penalizing Team Penske for violating push-to-pass parameters. It was discovered in warm-up ahead of the Long Beach race. Team Penske manipulated their push-to-pass system, giving them access to it on starts and restarts. At the season opener at St. Pete, Team Penske president Tim Cindric said software was manipulated for hybrid testing and was not properly returned to normal. Penske has announced today, as we record this, more suspensions for the team as a result of that. I think Tim Cindric's one of the guys that got suspended. There's a lot more even developing now, even though this was like a month ago that this started, or several weeks ago that this started. Joseph Newgarden was stripped of his season opening win at St. Pete. Both he and Scott McLaughlin were DQ'd from the race. Will Power was docked 10 points because it was found out that he didn't play really a central role in it. Pato Award is given the win at St. Petersburg. But on to the race itself. At Alabama, Scott McLaughlin wins the pole, leads the first 28 laps. He led a total of 58 on the day. He takes the lead from Will Power on lap 75. A caution comes out for Christian Rasmussen's spin on lap 86. And it sets up the final restart between Power and McLaughlin, but McLaughlin holds off Will Power on the last restart and takes home the win. Will Power and Linus Lundqvist, who started 19th, they both sit on the podium as well. So looking at the championship standings, you've got Colton Herta in first. Will Power is second, just 1 point back. Alex Palou is third, 3 points back. Scott Dixon is fourth, 7 points back. Rounding out the top 5 is Felix Rosenqvist. He is 14 points back. Scott McLaughlin is 9th. Joseph Newgarden is 15th. So thought it would be a good exercise to do hot or cold for each of the main teams. So we've got a hot or cold question for Penske, Andretti, McLaren, and Ganassi. If you're new to the program, hot or cold is where I say a statement and then we tell you whether or not we think it is a hot take or a cold take. And the first one, we're going to dive right into it. It deals with Team Penske. Penske, hot or cold, Penske wins in the month of May will taint the month. Originally, I had this as a hot take. I have since simmered to a lukewarm take on this one. To the casual fan, yes. But I think the fans that are more locked in will say that it won't really taint the month. I talked to one of my buddies who is a little bit more locked in even than I am, and he kind of, because I originally thought that it was Discover at Long Beach that they cheated and they still let him run the race. And so I was like, that seems kind of odd that they still let him run the race. Why not, let the St. Pete result stand, or maybe dock them the amount of, I think there's a total of 200 seconds that teams get for push to pass. So maybe maybe just dock them, take 200 seconds, get a 200 second penalty, which would still put them in last, but at least they still get the points for that race. Instead of being DQ'd and given 0 points. Maybe I'm salty because Joseph Newgarden was my championship pick, and this hurts his chances a little bit. It was also funny because I had Joseph Newgarden in Fantasy IndyCar that week, and I looked at the standings from that, and it reflected his DQ, and I texted the group I was like, I didn't do anything wrong. Why did I get penalized? I was like, why are you taking the win away from me? But anyway, so I originally thought it was a little bit more fishy, but I guess they did rectify it ahead of Long Beach. So it is just the St. Pete result that was tainted. But I mean, look, you've got Joseph Newgarden, who's your defending 500 champ. You've got Will Power, who has owned the Indy Road Course. Scott McLaughlin has a win on the season. He won your most recent race. The odds of a Penske win is obviously, I mean, it's always solid, but it's just as solid as ever. And there are always more eyes on the Indy 500 than any other IndyCar race, and that will only be heightened by Kyle Larson's attempt at the double. And just like other cheating scandals, it just calls all previous and immediate future success into question, because you're wondering, like, okay, what else have they done? What else can they do? It's, the first thing I thought of, even though I don't think it's nearly comparable, is the Astro sign stealing scandal from, a few years ago. And it's like, okay, fine. Because, there were Astro fans that were like, oh, well, we didn't have it for road games and we still won game 7. It's like, come on, you're telling me that you only cheated for home games and you're just going to leave the road games to chance, especially when it's a game 7. And it's like, they still, like, it just seems still a little fishy to me. So that's just going to call all future, like I said, all future and past success into question. And I'm not saying that Penske should never be allowed to win again. I'm just saying that a team caught cheating, winning the biggest race of the season, especially in back-to-back seasons, is not great optics. It's not. Like, I don't, like I said, I'm not saying they're never allowed to win again. It's just, that's not a great look. Now, the biggest question, I think, for Penske is whether or not a title is still in play for the 2 and 3 teams. McLaughlin is back up to 9th after his win at Barber, but you've got Newgarden, who's back in 15th, and I think Newgarden can still win. The schedule still favors him at the end, but he's currently 15th. Scott Dixon was 7th in 2018 and won the championship. That's the furthest back any driver has been heading into May and still won the championship. That's excluding 2020 because that was a little bit obviously different. But yeah, I went back to 2017 is the furthest I went back because I mean I knew it was going to take me a while to find the furthest back a driver has ever been, but I would imagine it's very infrequently that a driver comes from outside the top 10 halfway through the season to eventually win the championship. Newgarden was leading the points in his title seasons in 2017 and 2019 heading into Indy. So, what I come back to as far as it still being a lukewarm take is the fact that you're going to have maybe new eyeballs on the sport because of Kyle Larson, and they're going to be like, wait, was that team cheated and they still won the biggest race of the year? That seems odd. So it's just not a great look overall.
I'm going to actually say, the more I've thought about it, I'm going to say this is a cold take. Not super cold, but a cold. It's a chilly take. Mostly because of the steps that have been taken to rectify the situation. Yeah, the explanations, everybody's like, yeah, okay, whatever. You've heard so many reasons or excuses as to why it happened from the Penske camp, and it can make your head spin just looking at all the different reasons they've given. But I think one, it's going to be tough for them to be successful this May without Tim Cindric being available. Your lead strategist, especially for Joseph Newgarden, it's going to be tough. But if they were able to pull it off and win the Indy 500, especially if it's Joseph Newgarden, I don't think it's going to be horrible optics because there are so many Joseph Newgarden fans out there. He's one of those drivers that people just kind of like. There's not many. I like very similar to Tony Kanaan, like we were talking before we started recording. How he's like somebody that everybody seems to like, and you've never really met anybody that hates him or doesn't like him. It's very similar to Joseph Newgarden. I think if he were to win it, I think the optics would be okay, especially if, I mean, I don't know, maybe coming off of last year's Indy 500 victory where it was like, wait a second, they threw a red flag with 2 laps to go, that type of thing. It's been a little shaky. So, I mean, I don't know. Now I'm starting to think the optics could be bad. It
And like I said, that's why I
it's
said
one of
it.
those things that without having the gates been open yet and not actually being around the people and hearing their interactions when a Penske car is out on the track, it's a tough one just because is your fandom for that driver going to change because of one situation, or is now Penske becoming the villain, playing the villain role within IndyCar? Because I mean, look, you got owners and everybody clamoring for him to sell IndyCar, and it's been the optics of it overall have been it's been a bad start to the season for IndyCar in general. So I don't know. I think success could be bad for optics, but at the same time, I mean, Scott McLaughlin just won at Barber, and nobody's really flinched about that.
Right.
So if that is any indication, I think everything would be okay.
Yeah, like I've thought about it, and like I can't really see like Newgarden winning like the pole or something, or getting in the Fast Six and hearing like a chorus of boos. Like I don't think people feel necessarily that, which is why I said I think the bigger of an IndyCar fan you are, the less you're kind of disturbed by it. And then it's going to be those casuals that are just kind of in there, which it can help, it can hurt, as far as like, as far as like, you're going to have those people kind of tuning in for the first time being like, wait, the guy who owns the sport was caught cheating, and they're going to potentially, win the Indy 500, which, like I said, I'm not advocating that they should be like parked or anything. I'm just saying that I think, you're going to have definitely people that are going to think it is tainted, because of all that's gone on this year. But it, like I said, I think it's kind of more middle of the road. I mean, they've definitely served their punishment. I don't think there's much more that like can be done to like further punish them. I think anything more than what's already happened, even including today, would be overkill. So it's kind of and also like they've like whether or not you like or dislike what they've said after all the punishments were handed down, like at least they've kind of at least they haven't been like going back to the Astros, they haven't been like, we're the victims here. Like they've at least been like
if anything, I would almost lean on the side that they've been overpunished.
yeah.
I think because Roger Penske owning the series, I feel like they've essentially like overpunished themselves to almost as a statement, like
Right.
like Roger Penske making a statement of, just because I own the series doesn't mean I'm giving my team these advantages. So, there was maybe a slight screw up here somewhere in our process management, and because of that, wiping away, disqualifying a driver, and so now on a team side, we're going to suspend all of our top strategists and engineers for the entire month of May. And it's just like, I feel like they've gone over the top just to balance out the optics to make it,
Yeah. Right. What they've
I
done
don't know.
today is basically, you see it in college sports all the time where they're like, you know what? No one's punished us yet, but postseason ban. And it's like, okay, well, all right. We kind of get what you're doing, but
That's kind of like that's those teams that are like, we're sitting at 3-6 currently on the year, so we're gonna give ourselves that postseason ban because of something. And it's like, you weren't gonna make the postseason anyways. Stop.
right. But going off of the DQs, what that did do is that put, of course, Colton Herta in the top spot in the point standings. He is, of course, driving for Andretti Global, and that moves us to the hot or cold statement for Andretti, which is hot or cold. Colton Herta is a legitimate championship contender. And I think it's cold unless he wins either the GP or the 500. Herta has gone 33 races without a win. You have to go back to early 2022 for his last time atop the podium. Since then, he's got just 2 podiums in general. His highest points finish was 3rd in 2020. Since then, he's been 5th, 10th, and 10th the next 3 seasons. And Andretti Global has not won a title since 2012. But that last win that I mentioned for Herta was at the IMS Road Course in 2022. He's got a win, 2 podiums, and 4 top 5s on the IMS Road Course. And if he can run well and, dare I say, get a win at either the Sonsio Grand Prix or the 500, I think he'll put the rest of the sport on notice and say, hey guys, I'm actually, I know that I'm only at top spot in the points because of the whole, or that's how I got there, is because of the whole cheating scandal by Penske. But I'm actually legitimately up here and I can win races and that kind of thing. So Colton Herta, I think it's a cold take, but we'll take him a lot more seriously if he can get a win during the month of May.
I'm actually going to say this is a hot take. I think this year Andretti as a whole is a little bit more focused. Now that the Formula One thing is kind of behind them for the most part, not having to, it's still there, but just not in the race shop itself. Not having to try to prepare or figure out how to prepare a car for that series. And then, the talk of Colton Herta possibly being over in Formula One and all just kind of just a lot of stuff being juggled around up in the air. I think because they have that, the focus back on the here and the now and the IndyCar, I think Colton Herta can be a legitimate championship contender. And also, look, yeah, he is up there because of the penalty to the Penske drivers. But at the same time, it's like, even if it wasn't him, somebody's got to step into that place that Joseph Newgarden would be hanging out in the top 3 or 4. And so why not Colton Herta? I wouldn't be surprised if we do see him up on the podium. I don't know if it's a win or not, but a podium, especially at the Sonsio Grand Prix. So yeah, I'm going. This is not a full hot take, but this is a warm take.
Yeah, I think he's got the capability. I just think it's a little bit more contingent on what he can do in the month of May, because that'll definitely help his chances a lot. Moving on to Arrow McLaren. Their take is this: hot or cold, Arrow McLaren is still a tier 1 IndyCar team. And I'm going with a cold take because we were ready to anoint them the next great team in IndyCar back in 2023. We had the ahead of that season in the preview, we put Arrow McLaren on the precipice of joining Ganassi and Penske atop the sport. And since then, 0 wins, save for Pato O'Ward being gifted the St. Pete win this year after the DQ of Joseph Newgarden. No top 5s outside of that. So literally, now granted, Pato O'Ward had a top 5 to, obviously be granted the win. He was second. But outside of that, they have no other top 5s on the season. Since 2023, they have 11 podiums, 8 from O'Ward, 2 from Felix Rosenqvist, 1 from Rossi. So 8 are from one driver, 2 are from a driver that's not there anymore, and 1 is from Alexander Rossi, who we thought hey, change of scenery, it's going to get him going again. Let's see. That has not happened. Rossi's average finish with the team is 11th, about middle of the pack. Rosenqvist has 2 top 5s and a P1 award this season with Meyer Shank. So he's really, talk about, drivers that have, changed scenery and had success. That's Felix Rosenqvist right now. He's 5th in points, which is ahead of all the Arrow McLaren drivers. And then they just let go David Malukas, who was hurt before the season and has not actually run a race for them. So they're kind of in shambles right now, in my opinion. Now, granted, we'll see what happens with the month of May. But like I said in the intro, there's even if you think, Pato O'Ward definitely is a 500 contender, but it's kind of not a great sign for your team when a driver. Now, granted, he's the best driver possibly in the world right now. but you have him come in and is already leapfrogging your 2 series regulars or 1 series regular as your best chance of winning the 500. So yeah, they're definitely not a tier 1. I mean, not saying they're like tier 3 or tier 4, but like they're definitely not on the same level as Penske and Ganassi like we thought they might be heading into last year.
Yeah, this is definitely a cold take. I agree 100%. I mean, I feel like, when it was Arrow Schmidt, they they were potentially being on the precipice. They had what it took. Then McLaren got in there, and it's like, okay, now there's going to be an influx of money, so that's going to help. But McLaren just kind of brought with them all of their dirty laundry with, or not really dirty laundry, the drama that follows Formula One, within the paddock there and everything. They haven't been a favorite within the garages, just put it that way. But yeah, it's very disappointing to see the level of talent that is there with this team and just how far underperforming it is. But then it does lead you to wonder. Like I've mentioned this before, is the passion really still there with Alexander Rossi? Or was that the winning of the 100th running and then the season after that where he just seemed so dominant? Was that a fluke? Was that just, momentum? A young guy that's just he's really fiery and passionate about it, and now it's kind of simmered down. And is this the real Alexander Rossi, or, well, I mean, what's going on? So, but I agree. Arrow McLaren is not a tier 1 IndyCar team right now. There's still only 3 in the top tier. But at the same time, it's hard. It's going to be hard for teams outside of those top 3 to crack into that top tier. I mean, and that's one of the biggest knocks against IndyCar is it's just the same. It's the same old year after year, and it's the same names. I think I think everybody was really excited about the potential of Arrow McLaren just because it was going to bring some new faces at least, or new cars to the front of the pack to be added into the conversation, and it just hasn't been there, and it's a head scratcher as to why. But yeah, definitely not a tier 1 team right now.
Talking about Alexander Rossi being a little bit of a fluke, his success early. I mean, he won the 500 on fuel strategy, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love fuel strategy. I love when races come down to that. But at the same time, it's definitely not like he dominated. He led
race somebody.
Yeah, he didn't. He didn't lead 120 laps and won the 500. He won on fuel mileage. Like I said, I think I love the strategy part of that, but yeah, no, it's definitely, like you said, it's a head scratcher for sure. Although I think there's a debate that we had maybe at a different time, because I think it's just 2 top tier teams. I think it's Penske and Ganassi, because, like I said, I haven't had an Andretti Global Championship in 12 years. So
That's true.
I mean, it's not just championships, but like also like, I mean, who driving for? Because look, you wouldn't even during the tier list, you wouldn't even let me put one of Andretti Global's drivers in the championship contender list right off the bat. Now granted, we came to a consensus and we added Kirkwood and McLaughlin to that. But at the same time, like, I think Kirkwood is their best driver. I mean, before going into the season, I think Kirkwood was their best driver. I think it's Herta now, but really, I mean, but in that same vein, Herta has dropped off. And also, I mean, look, or not Herta, yeah, Kirkwood has dropped off. And like also, Marcus Ericsson, has really not, I thought he was going to be the guy to kind of bring that team together and make them into a little bit of a more fiery team. And he's been up there. He's done, but he's not really been in contention to win in these first few races. So at least not as consistently as he was with Ganassi. So
I don't know. Even with Ganassi with Marcus Ericsson, there was like 2 races that you would see him up front in battling. It was Nashville and the Indy 500.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe I'm not too surprised with the Marcus Ericsson thing. But yeah, I would agree that there are only 2 true top tier 1 teams in IndyCar, which we'll get into it here in a little bit from now, but it is one of the thorns. It's one of the sticking reasons that I feel like IndyCar is just kind of stuck in the mud and not able to grow.
Yeah. Well, and let's go ahead and talk about that last team here, which is Chip Ganassi. Their hot or cold take is this. Hot or cold, Chip Ganassi Racing is the team with the most to prove this May. And I would say that's a cold take. Reason I bring this up is because you've got, of course, Alex Palou, who's a 2-time champ, who was so close to winning the 500 in 2021, set the pole speed record last May. You wonder, is he going to finally break through and win the 500? You've got Scott Dixon, who's been chasing his second 500 since 2008. He's the all-time laps leader in 500 history. He won the IMS Road Course last season, the second race. Can he become a 2-time winner at the Indy 500? So Ganassi definitely has motivation behind their 500 campaign, but I mean, see the 3 even above questions about these other teams. You've got Penske trying to get out of the shadow of their cheating scandal. You've got McLaren, who's they're running into each other half the time. And then you've got Andretti, who's trying to get back.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the best of those 3 others besides Ganassi, but at the moment, as far as motivation to I think it goes McLaren, Penske, Andretti, then Ganassi. Like Ganassi, I think is the team with the least to prove. They haven't had really anything going on. They definitely have storylines surrounding their drivers, but they're not as maybe kind of crazy or dire as the other teams.
Right. Yeah. This is a cold take. This is probably the coldest take of them all. Look, Ganassi shows up in the month of May. And yeah, they may not be the fastest in practice. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But then they come out in qualifying and they're setting records and they're sitting on the front row. I mean, how many times have we seen it that Scott Dixon's just absolutely run away with the pole? Yeah. And then you get into race day and they're right up there contending. Occasionally they have their down year. But look, the last 2 years, they won it 2 years ago, and they almost won it. Maybe should have won it last year again with Marcus Ericsson. So yeah, I mean, they have nothing to prove this month of May. Anything that they can do positively, or if it's just icing on the cake for them. Now, I mean, I think if you dig down deeper within that statement, I think Scott Dixon on that team may have the most to prove, just because he just hasn't been the same in the Indy 500 the past few years. You're not talking about Scott Dixon in there. So I don't know. I think if anybody's got to prove anything there, it would be him, but it's not because he has to. It's more he wants to prove something. Like you said, he's been chasing that second 500 since 2008. And I know he wants it. But yeah, as a team as a whole, they don't have much to prove.
Yeah, because even with some of the other drivers, I mean, you've got Linus Lundqvist, who he might have something to prove going into with it being his first May, but at the same time, he's still literally a rookie. Like if he has a bad May, I don't think anyone's gonna really bat an eye. Maybe you could go to Kiffin Simpson or Marcus Armstrong, who have just not been good at all. Now granted, Simpson's also a rookie, so can't give him too much. But Marcus Armstrong, his first time on the oval, with Indy, he's not really done a whole lot in his short stint with Ganassi so far. So I mean, there are other drivers besides Palou and Dixon who have maybe some things to prove. But yeah, the team as a whole, does not have much to prove. So looking at the state of IndyCar as a whole right now, before we get into the predictions, Just kind of looking at where we stand as a sport going into the month of May. And honestly, yeah, the Penske situation this season wasn't great. Yeah, the thermal challenge was a dud in my opinion. The All-Star race, it needs to be an oval night race either before the month of May or after, preferably after the month of May. Whether that be maybe
after.
we had the crazy realization last week. Like it had just completely slipped my mind that like we don't have Texas on the schedule this year. Like we've done a preview of the series, we did all that stuff, and then I only just realized oh yeah, we don't have Texas. Like heck, I'd have that as the All-Star race. That would be a fun one. Because that one always
you gotta have it after the Indy 500 to build off of the momentum.
Right. But the fact that I think one thing that kind of makes me be like, hey, this is in a good place right now. I think we're okay. I mean, you've got one of the biggest stars in racing right now, and Kyle Larson, a driver who races for the most prestigious team in NASCAR. He's interested, he's interested in doing the double. And that speaks volume for IndyCar. Now, granted, he's not doing this to help IndyCar. He's doing this to as a cool notch in my belt kind of thing. But like I said before the season, this is the biggest double attempt since Tony Stewart in terms of NASCAR title contender running the 500 and the Coke 600. Obviously, we've seen Robbie Gordon do it since Tony Stewart. We've seen Kurt Busch do it since then, but Kurt Busch was the most recent driver to do it, and he, I think for one, didn't even finish the double, which, I mean, it's tough to do. I'm not knocking him for that, but he ended up finishing 12th in NASCAR points. So as far as having a driver that, hey, just literally won the closest race in NASCAR history last week, and in a couple of weeks he'll be driving an IndyCar. I mean, I think that's great for the sport, and puts it in a great spot. Yeah, there's other things that man, I wish it would change, but the fact of the matter is, I don't think it is going to change. But as the sport as a whole, I think they're in a good place right now.
So, okay, what spawned this question was, at the beginning of the month of May, I stated that I'm just not as excited about the month of May as I usually am. And a lot of it has to do, well, actually all of it has to do with just the kind of the amount of negative headlines coming out of IndyCar week after week after week after week. Whether it's the Penske cheating scandal or anonymous owners and a random David Malukas being let go. That one I'm not so on fire about. It was a negative headline, but at the same time, it's kind of dude, you got injured in a non-racing incident. You got to be more careful.
Yeah,
you don't have the clout to your name yet to be able to hang on through that kind of injury. Chase Elliott did it. Well, Chase Elliott's also been named the most popular driver in NASCAR year after year after year. So, yeah, so he's able to hold on to that. But at the same time, the NASCAR season is also much longer than the
February to November.
Yeah, it's basically year round. But and then just the I don't know, the animosity almost that other owners have towards Penske this year, and how everybody's just turned on him. And then there's the whole, everybody just doesn't like Zach Brown from McLaren. And it's just I don't know. There's just a lot of just negativity. And then also with how the All-Star whatever challenge was just an absolute dud. An absolute just dud. And it was just how can you get it was just I haven't been able to get as excited for it. Now it's changing. That's changing as we get more into the month of May. We decorate the front of the house for it with checkered flags and hang up the IMS flag and everything. And my kids are seeing all this stuff around town and wanting to be more involved with it. You just have to tell them every time they see a race car on TV, it's not Chase Elliott. They love Chase Elliott mostly because his name's Chase, and that's also somebody from Paw Patrol. But but it's just so it's starting to come around. But I just feel right now there IndyCar as a whole is just kind of it just seems stuck in the mud. And I think that's what a lot of the other owners are just kind of feeling upset about. Like, look, we for a while there we were really battling with NASCAR and potentially overtaking them. Then NASCAR just kind of flipped the switch, kind of figured some things out, and now they're back to being popular. And then I go back to this one. It's not a knock on the drivers whatsoever, like the older drivers. They're still good, but it is the same names year after year after year. Well, you can say the same thing about NASCAR. Well, yeah, but at the same time, the older drivers are now starting to fade to the back, and there's these new younger drivers that are everybody's very excited about, and it just seems like the top tier teams are. I mean, Ganassi, props to you for Linus Lundqvist, because out of all the top teams, that is the youngest driver, and or the freshest name at least. So props to them on that, but otherwise it's just we're with the same old same old. But at I mean, because they're good, nobody else's can really afford them, and I don't know. I mean, then you got a guy like Will Power who's just kind of there with Penske, and it's like, couldn't somebody? Isn't there a younger driver out there that deserves that opportunity to be with one of those top teams to kind of rejuvenate the fan base? You know, it may take one of these top tier teams to say, okay, we're looking towards the future now. Like, look, Hendrick Motorsports a couple of years ago in NASCAR was awful, absolutely horrible, probably one of the worst teams in NASCAR that season. But it's because they went ahead and they did their changing of the guard, and they brought in all these young, inexperienced drivers, and then now they're on top because they were given that opportunity, and they've kind of let in the new names and everything, and that's made it fresh. It's brought in that younger audience again, um, and then it would be nice to see some more like legacies, I guess. And we'll eventually see that in IndyCar. We're seeing that in NASCAR, and you got my dad grew up watching Bill Elliott, so now I'm cheering on his son Chase. It's just that kind of, and then it brings up the other generations as well. I don't know. I don't feel like IndyCar is in a great spot right now, especially with the divide within the garage of owners. And I'm not saying it will happen or it even could happen, but it just feels like that, almost like the time when there was, I mean, maybe not fully. I was really young, so I don't really know it to its full extent, but when IndyCar split and we had IndyCar and we had CART, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not even saying that could happen, but it just kind of feels like something like that is a possibility with just the way people are like the people that are running the stuff, these teams and everything is kind of going. I don't know.
Well,
I
I
don't
mean,
know. Let me stop being old guy that yells at cloud. And I will say, look, the having Kyle Larson come in, I don't necessarily know if that's a great thing for IndyCar. It's a great thing for the Indy 500. It's an amazing thing for the Indy 500, and it's going to put a lot. It's going to put a lot of people in the stands that may not have normally been in the stands or tuning into the Indy 500. It could be a really bad thing for IndyCar if Kyle Larson comes out and wins the Indy 500. And it's like, ooh, NASCAR's best just beat all of your best. And I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but it's one of those things that it's like.
I mean, I know what you're saying, but it'd be like if, like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the Indy 500 is. I mean, heck, you saw that even in the early 2000s. You saw like Juan Pablo won his first ever start. Alexander Rossi won his first ever start. Like, it's not, now granted, I know they all went through like the pipelines. It's not a NASCAR driver coming over, but like, I don't know. I see it as I see it as more like the Indy 500 is your best race. It's going to be a shot in the arm. And hey, no matter what it is, if it's, Kyle Larson, the worst thing that can happen is Kyle Larson wrecks in like the third lap. And, ends up, whether or not he wins, if he does win, then fantastic. I think that's going to be more.
Like, and I'll be honest. I'm pulling for him to win.
Yeah,
he's one of my favorite drivers. I think he is one of the top 3 best drivers in the entire world. He's one of those guys that you can put him in any type of car and he's going to be successful. My biggest worry, though, is that if he wins and there's these casual fans that are tuning in that have no real allegiance to any like particular team or driver, and they've enjoyed watching him run and win that race, and then they like, oh, I want to see him compete in this double, and then they go on over to the NASCAR race, and it's like, well, NASCAR sometimes puts on a better show. I mean, the Indy 500 is probably the best show, but they're like, I really enjoyed watching Kyle Larson. So now they've got somebody that they are more attached to. And then the following weeks, when NASCAR is on at the same time as IndyCar,
or even not,
when where is that casual
off for 3 weeks?
That's true. But that's the thing then, too.
Right. Yeah.
IndyCar the reason they drop the ball is they do not, they don't capitalize on the momentum anymore. Yeah. And it just, you go, it used to be, there was a time where, Texas was either before or after the Indy 500.
It was always after.
It was always after. So it always had some momentum, and it was like right into the exciting racing at Texas. And it just really kind of set up for the rest of the season. And it got you really kept that momentum and that excitement going. Whereas, now we're going to take 3 weeks off, or now we're going to go race in the streets of Toronto. And then it's like, it's single file racing the entire time with only 2 passing zones. And, the momentum that you had is just, it's gone. It's gone.
Right. And I mean, look, I will not I will not disagree with you that this season has been a dud so far. This season has not been the best of IndyCar, just because you've had, really 3. I know McLaughlin didn't lead like every lap like Newgarden and Pillow did in the thermal race, but he still dominated that race at Barber. So you've had 3 races that one driver dominated the whole race, one of which got DQ'd, and then you had Scott Dixon winning at Long Beach on fuel strategy. So you've not had really a lot of great battles for the front, and like that's the thing. I mean, I don't think, I'm not sitting here as a former big time NASCAR fan and calling for the eradication of road and street courses. But I think, for one, road courses of the 2 do offer a little bit better of an opportunity for racing, whereas street courses, you're right, there is a lot of narrow, twists and turns, and it's more about, those few areas that you can pass more than anything else. But like, yeah, I mean, and there's things like, I don't know how you fix that. I don't know how you fix, races out on street courses, that's not gimmicky. Now, I think they do drop the ball. Like, the All-Star race should not have been at Thermal, if that's what you're going to call your All-Star race. It also shouldn't have been like the second race of the season, and it also
race of the year,
right? And also, like, you're right. They race at St. Pete, and then the next, that was March 10th, and then your next points race is April 21st. Like, literally, like 6 weeks. 6 weeks later. And that just can't be. Whereas, NASCAR, you go right from the Daytona 500, to Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Right. So, now one thing they can do, because I know there's been a lot of, discontent in the NASCAR stables about like their short track package, and really the only tracks that NASCAR is good on right now are kind of the intermediate tracks, like your Kansases and your Las Vegases. What would be interesting to see, because I've always advocated for more ovals. I think the season should be 18 to 21 races, and you should have 7 of each. You should have 7 road courses, 7 street courses, or just maybe 10 road and street courses and then 10 ovals would be good for the sport. And I think that, maybe kind of overlapping a bit because really, really there's not, they go to the Milwaukee Mile, which NASCAR doesn't go to. They're going to Iowa, which NASCAR is going to this year. They go to Gateway, where NASCAR's just recently come back to. There's no ovals like back in the IRL days where you had, now granted Texas and IMS are, but even IMS has been the road course for NASCAR the last few years. There's no like overlapping ovals that they could put on a better show at to be like, hey, you know what? That Martinsville race was bad for NASCAR, which I didn't watch it, but I've heard people who did watch it say it was bad. That race at Martinsville was bad for NASCAR. IndyCar put on a great show at Martinsville. I've always wanted the IndyCar's Richmond night race to come back. That would be a fun one. Like, they need to have some of those races, and what they should do is they should alternate it. So if you've got 10, so I kind of like this idea now, 10 ovals, 10 road and street courses, and you just alternate it. So you have an oval, road course, oval, road course, oval, road course. So at least at that point, you have, because that's the thing. IMS is their first, it's their sixth race or fifth race, sixth on the calendar, fifth points race. Everything prior to that has been a road course. And then you've got one oval, and then it's backlogged with ovals this season. And there are more ovals this year than past, but you've had mainly only road courses the entire first part of the year. So yeah, no, I think there's things that they can do, like we've talked about with adding more ovals, like we talked about with the throwback race and the all-star races that they can do. It's like I said when we started the conversation, I just don't know what it will take to get us to that point, because I don't know. Because you're right. I do agree with you that it's kind of stuck in the mud where it seems like the iteration of IndyCar that we have now has run its course and it needs to take that next step, but I don't know how that gets taken. So,
yeah. The other thing we even talked about was the broadcast booth, changing it up a little bit. It's just compared to NASCAR's is fun, entertaining. You're learning something about what's going on in the cars, but at the same time, you feel like you're being drawn in by the personal stories that they're sharing about the tracks and what the banter back and forth. It's really you feel like you just got a group of people sitting in your living room watching the race together. Whereas with IndyCar, the broadcast booth is kind of, I don't know, too technical. You have James Hinchcliffe, who tries to bring a lighter side to things, but then you have Townsend Bell, who's trying to give you all these technical things of oh, this is what I do. It's like, Townsend, you were not a very good driver. At least in NASCAR, it's they have Kevin Harvick and Clint Boyer. Well, they were successful, and people are tuning in to listen to them. So one of the things I mentioned is bringing in somebody that is a fan favorite, a big time fan favorite. Yeah, James Hinchcliffe is one of those. People loved him, mostly because I feel like his story. But people loved him. And then the one I would bring in is, now that he's retiring, whatever, Tony Kanaan. I think if you add Tony Kanaan into the broadcast booth, him and James Hinchcliffe as your color guys would be phenomenal. I think your ratings would go up because people would actually tune in, and I don't know. People like Tony Kanaan. I feel like he could bring some humor to it. He could bring those stories. And then when he talks about technical stuff with the car, people are gonna go, yeah, okay, that's really okay. They're gonna really dive in with him because it's well, he knows he was successful, So I think some change up needs to happen there, and that's not. I wouldn't say that's gimmicky,
no,
but it's just kind of making stirring it up a little bit so it just doesn't remain what it is, and it right now it's stale.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that side of things, because yeah, Tony Kanaan in there would be cool. Look, I'm a follower of him on Twitch. He has a Twitch stream. He's a man of the people. It would be a fun experiment there if you were to join the booth. We went a little long on that, so let's go ahead and get to our predictions quickly here for the Sonsio Grand Prix, the race on the IMS Road Course. We're going to give you our pole prediction, our dark horse prediction, and our eventual winner. So I'll go ahead and give you my pole winner and dark horse real quick. Who I think is going to win the pole? I've got Will Power. He's finished second in the Firestone Fast 6 the last 2 races. He's been so close to P1, and I think finally on a track where he dominates, a track where he's got 5 wins, he finally breaks through and grabs the pole. My dark horse, no, I thought about going, my normal route, which is like looking at the dates and car numbers and all that stuff. And it's like, really, there's only one race run on the 12th of one Indy Grand Prix run on the 12th. And it was won by Will Power. I was like, that's boring. So let's go with my dark horse being Linus Lundqvist. He grabbed his first podium at Barber after starting 19th, and he's won twice on the Indy Road Course and Indy Lights. So I think that he's a good pick to win. If you're looking for somebody who's not usually at the front of the pack, I think he's a good candidate to maybe shock some people this weekend.
Yeah, so my pole winner, I like the Will Power pick just because if he's shown up this year and in years past, it has been qualifying. So yeah, I'm gonna go Will Power as my pole winner. My dark horse to win it. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. My pole winner is going to be Scott Dixon. I think Scott Dixon gets the pole. Kicking off the month of May with a bang. Actually, no. Gosh, this is tough.
It is tough. There's been a lot of good
pole winner Alex Palou. Because he almost swept the entire month last year, right?
Right.
Yeah. Both poles, winner of the Grand Prix, and yeah, okay. So yeah, I'm going Alex Palou as my pole winner. My dark horse, believe it or not, after we just kind of like ripped this team, my dark horse is actually Pato O'Ward. I feel like he shows up in May. I don't know. But it was either going to be Pato O'Ward or Alexander Rossi. Look, the last time Alexander Rossi won a race, it was on the Indy Road Course.
And his best finish with McLaren is at the IMS Road Course. He was 5th last year.
Give me Alexander Rossi as my dark horse. Gets that monkey off his back again. But my winner, I like your pick of Colton Herta, but I'm going with a guy that right now just seems to be hot, regardless of any headlines. Give me Scott McLaughlin.
Yeah.
I think he is on a heater this year. He's out to prove something. He's much more comfortable in the car now. I think May could be an interesting month for him.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot, and yeah, I'm going with Colton Herta for my pick to win the race. Like I said before, he's got a win, 2 podiums, and 4 top 5s on the Indy Road Course. He's extra motivated as the points leader to win. I think he gets it done. But yeah, no, I think McLaughlin's a good pick too, because just for the fact that he's due, like he's like now that Newgarden has won. McLaughlin is the next Penske driver to, finally get some success at the IMS Road Course, or at the IMS in general, because McLaughlin's just kind of been an afterthought in his previous 500s. He's only had like a few, but I mean, he's never really been in contention, whether it be on the road course or in the Indy 500. So that's a very good pick. I like where your head's at with that one. But that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for hanging out. Remember, you can like us on Facebook, 3C Media. Go on over to X and follow us there at 3C Media, at 3C Media Sports. Follow us on TikTok, 3C Media. And if you're listening to us on the podcast apps, hop on over to the YouTube channel. We've got some good videos. We've got a lot of great feedback, whether it be the Caitlin Clark video, whether it be the Colts draft recap video. You guys have been killing it with the support, so we greatly appreciate that. If you're on the YouTube channel, hop on over to the podcast apps, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. You can find me at Crash Course FM on Twitter. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87.
Next week, our month of May IndyCar conversations continue. We have a couple different ideas as it will be looking forward to qualifying at the Indy 500, so it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll also recap the Sonsio Grand Prix as well, so a lot of great conversations to be had next week as well. But until then, have a good one, everybody.